Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome to the second round of seminars. This one is with David Robertson. If you got that wrong, then you can leave now. It's not fishy music. It's not anything else. It's David Robertson. So stay put if that's what you thought you were coming for. And welcome. I hope you're enjoying your day so far, from the worship this morning, fellowship over lunchtime, and whatever seminars you got into earlier. Well, we come to this one, and maybe have some note that this was the biggest sign up for any of the seminars. So what is it, David, that you do or stimulate that has got interest? Well, maybe we'll find out as we go along. I'm not going to do a great introduction to David, other than to say, as probably what most of you know, David is the minister at St. Peter's Free Church in Dundee. And we can also make reference as we go along to the organisation SOAS, which David, of course, is heavily involved with, and we will refer to it later. But I'm not going to do much of a biography. Like, he went to school here, he's got so many kids, he supports Dundee Football Club?
Yes. Come on, Mark Lillian today. I believe in miracles. I believe.
I hope you're still rejoicing at 20-5.
This is Dundee. You know what will happen.
That's right.
We will be ahead in the last game of the season, and St Mirren will be losing, and they will score in the last minute.
Yes.
Oh, for St Mirren.
Tell me the talent.
Well, folks, two things. One, we will hope to organise the time in such a way that there's room for question and answers at the end. But David is also more than comfortable that as we're going along, if he says something that you want him to repeat or explain further, then just stick a hand up and we'll try to organise things that way. In other words, we'll be quite interactive if we can. Feel free to do that. It's not a lecture as such. It's a dialogue here, and if that dialogue can spill out all the way across, then all the better for that. David, I want to begin by asking you how your life has changed since the publication of this slim volume, the Dawkins Letters, Challenging Atheist Myths, by a certain David Robertson, who was perhaps more of an unknown name then than he is now. How has your life changed since this book came on the shelves?
Well, in some ways, not much, because I've always liked arguing and debating. And in other ways, because of this book, what was surprising about it was it did actually become a bestseller. In the year that it was published, there were 180,000 books published in Britain. And the publishers told me that of them, 172,000 sold less than 3,000 copies. That's what you expect in this day and age. To have an unknown Christian book from a small publisher in the Highlands sell 30,000 copies was a big deal. And it was a big deal for me. Not because it sold so much, but because it brought me into contact with so many people. And I think the biggest thing for me, I made a couple of mistakes with this, but first of all, I put my email address on the back. I'm still getting emails all the time. And then we did something quite unusual initially. We decided that whenever we launched it, we would not do it in a church or in a Christian bookshop, but we went to Borders mainly, but also Waterstone and some other bookshops. And Borders told me that it was the most successful book tour they've had in Scotland, which they insisted that everyone, all their stores would take it because it was so popular. And that was great because it was nothing to do with me. I mean, nobody knows who I am. I mean, I don't really want people to know who I am because they always have kind of wrong impressions. You know, I did one event down in Birmingham, I think it was, or Bedford, one of them, and some atheist who came along actually wrote, well, he's not as evil as we thought he was. It's the atheist concept of evil. But so it changed in that I got far more opportunities to tell more non-Christians about Jesus, which was wonderful for me. It didn't make me rich. this is Christian publishing, that didn't do anything financially for me. It took me away from my congregation quite a bit, and that was a big change, and we had to sit down and talk about what that meant, and how we would do that, because I was determined to stay in a parish ministry and not become an itinerant evangelist. And that was a time of great upheaval and change in the church and in the Free Church as a whole at that time as well, which I was part of. It was tough on my family for a while. I find it very difficult to say no, and I now am in a position where I did get seriously ill. I almost died. I was in hospital for ICU in 9 Wells for 9 weeks. And since then, I now have a committee that if I get asked to speak anywhere, everything has to go through them. And my wife is on that committee. so that's kind of changed things a bit. I would say personally, internally, if you like, I've had to wallow in a lot of filth, and I've had to face a lot of accusations and a lot of very intelligent as well attacks on my faith. And what it's done is it's just enormously strengthened my faith. The way I describe it is this: if you like the Lord of the Rings film, in the second one they've got this thing where they're attacking Helm's Deep. And I remember I was doing a debate with a philosophy professor, and I was really scared, because this guy was American, he was a former Baptist. Most of the people I debate are easy to debate. I rarely lose an argument, not because I'm brilliant, but because they haven't a clue what they're talking about. They don't know what Christianity is. So it's just dead easy. They argue against a caricature. But this guy, I thought, this would be a level 5, really tough. So I was praying, I was asking people to pray, and he stood up and he started to speak. And as he was speaking, I kept thinking, is this it? Is this it? Come on. Have you not got something else? Have you not got something else? And I felt like, at Helm's Deep, where they have this, the orcs are attacking. And for those of you who don't know Lord of the Rings, never mind. Go back, buy the DVDs and watch this. The orcs are attacking, and the king says about Sauron, is that all you've got? And it turns out it wasn't, and a big bomb blew everything up. And I was waiting for this big bomb, and it never came. And so many times I've been in debates with people who are cleverer than me, who are more sophisticated, who've got much bigger support. And I'm thinking, they've got nothing against the gospel. This just doesn't work. And that particular debate, the Atheist Society organised, were so upset at the professor because he got massacred. Because he just thought all he had to do was turn up. But for me, it's given me a far greater confidence in the gospel. And I would have to say, less confidence in myself. I screw up quite a lot. And therefore, it's really good to have Jesus on your side.
Thanks, Dave. Let me just further on this actual book before we go any more on. Were you in print before this book? Was this your first venture?
No, that was my second. I wrote a book called Awakening, which I actually preferred, which is a biography of Robert Marley McShane, a modern biography of Robert Marley McShane. Because I got so fed up, I'm in McShane's church, I got so fed up with all these Northern Irish people and Dutch people and Americans coming to bow at the Protestant shrine of McShane, that I decided to do some study on him, and I ended up writing a book, and at that time it was Paternoster who published it. They didn't know what to do with it, because I'm a historian, but the standard history format I thought was dreadful. So I wrote it as a kind of study almost. I did quite a lot of research into Dundee at the time, and Shane's evangelism, and a lot of stuff that went on. And I then split that up into shorter chapters. I had questions, a Bible reading, a prayer as part of it. And poor Paternoster, they had no idea what to do with it, so they classed it as autobiography, which was McShane, the reincarnation of McShane. So I wrote Awakening, and I loved that. I loved doing that, and that was my inclination, history rather than this.
Sure. Well, you've explained why you wrote that, but what I wanted to ask you, why did you feel the need to write this? I think when the Dawkins book came out, it was splashed across the country and across the world. I bought it and read it. I really wanted to hear what the guy had to say. In part, I found it very interesting. But it didn't make me think, I must write a response. What was it that made you think, as in David Robertson, I need to challenge that book, I need to respond to the Dawkins book? What moved you in that way?
Well, I certainly had no intention of writing a book. I tell you, this is the honest story. I mean, all I can do, reality is always stranger than fiction. You couldn't make this stuff up. I was in Costa's and Robertson in Dundee, and I saw Dawkins, The God Delusion. I didn't even know it just come out. And I thought, I'll have a look at this, but I'm not going to buy it, so I'll do what I normally do, skinflint, Scotsman. I'll go and buy myself a cappuccino and read the first chapter and put it back, which is what I did. By the time I wrote my way through the whole book, I'd spent far more on cappuccinos than I would have spent on it. Wasn't very long. And I've bought a couple of copies since then. But as I began to read it, I thought, okay, I have to be really fair with this guy, and maybe this will be a real challenge to my faith. I have to be really open and see what I can do. And I did expect to be quite attacked in my faith, and instead what happened is, as I read it, I got, first of all, I was amused at how dumb it was. I mean, just incredibly dumb, from an intellectual point of view. And I was so thankful when Prospect magazine, who had him as one of the world's top 3 intellectuals, said, this is a really dumb damn book, because that was my instant reaction. And I thought, if my 12-year-old daughter couldn't argue against this, I think I would, divorce her and divorce her kids. Because it would just seem to be incredibly dumb. It was well written. And then I got quite angry at the misrepresentations of Christianity and of Christ, but particularly Christianity. And because I felt it was dumb, and because I got a wee bit angry, and because I was a wee bit upset, I'm a Scottish male. I do not emote. I don't show emotion except on terraces. And when my team score a goal, which is very, very rare, and then Dens Park erupts with me hugging complete strangers. Who, if I did it in the street, would accuse me of assault. So what I do is I write things down. I keep a spiritual journal. I write things all the time. I write, I don't really know what a blog is, but I write stuff and it goes on the internet. I'm known in ICU as the vicar with the laptop, because apparently I wrote a blog from ICU, which they have no idea how I did, and I have no idea what I did, or how I did it. But I just write, I like writing. And it's not for anyone to read. I mean, if you ever read my diary, I'll have to kill you. Because it's not that kind of diary. So I wrote this down. I wrote Richard Dawkins an open letter. It's a stylistic device. The Free Church in its wisdom had given me a column on their website, which was insane on their part, but I kept winding everyone up. And I just wrote, Dear Professor Dawkins, and I wrote a reply to his first chapter. Well, about 4 or 5 days after that went on the Free Church website, I started getting all these emails from atheists. And I was so impressed with these atheists. I thought, Free Church people don't read the Free Church website. Atheists do. So I was and then it became an intriguing one. From a man who said, David, I'm an atheist. I disagree with your position, but I would like to apologize for the way that you're being treated. Not all atheists are like this. What are you talking about? So I wrote back, what are you talking about? And he wrote back and said, oh, you poor dear, you have no idea, do you? I said, no, what are you talking about? He said, the Dawkins website. I didn't even know there was a Dawkins website. So I went onto the Dawkins website, and my letter, the owner of the site had put it on as the front page, and people were allowed to respond. And by the time I got there were 600 responses. By the time I left there were 7,000. It was by far the most commented on article they'd ever had. And about a third of the responses were fairly reasonable, but this guy is talking rubbish. A third were fairly incoherent. And a third were, the way I put it is this. Suppose I'd gone on the Al-Qaeda website and said Muhammad was a paedophile. I wouldn't have got as violent a reaction as I got. I mean, these people were just incredible. I think, I don't know if the page is in here, I can't even remember the page in the book. I remember my sister. Yeah, this was the one. She phoned me, my sister, this time I wasn't a Christian. And this is one of the ways that our life changed, because my sister became a Christian through this, which is lovely. She's 40 years old and a fairly militant atheist. She's converted. She's now working for the Free Church in a community project up in Alness, which is fantastic. She gave up her job to do that. But she phoned me up, and I could hear her laughing. And I imagine the tears falling down her face because she was in such hysteria. She said, "This is so good." She said, "This is brilliant." She said, if you ever publish a book, put this on the front cover. She said, I'm getting a t-shirt made. She says, this has got you to a T. I said, what are you talking about? She said, quote number 333. I'll just put in bleeps, okay? Bleep. David Robertson is a self-righteous, narrow-minded, up his own bleep, thick as pig bleep, moronic retard. Watch out, David, the sky fairy is late for his second coming, and I'll be angry with you. Why is anyone debating with this moron? He doesn't know how to. He has the intellectual capacity of roadkill. I love that. That's just such a fantastic insult. So, anyway, how that turned into a book is, the other thing that my wife will tell you about me is, I'm Scots in this, I'm really thrown. And I don't let go. So I thought, right, well, stuff it, I'm going to carry on. So I wrote a second letter. I got banned from the Dawkins website, which didn't help, because I came back under a pseudonym. They banned me again, so I came back again under another pseudonym. I called myself, Dawkins had said that myself and Alison McGrath and John Lennox were like fleas living off a dog's back. So I called myself the Wee Flea, thinking they'll get that, but they don't know Scottish Church history. So I survived as the Wee Flea for about a month. But I wrote 2-3 more responses, and I did one letter per chapter in Dawkins. And then, this was the beginning of December, Christian Focus phoned me, and I talked to them, and they said, David, can you do a book on this? I said, what do you mean? And they said, can you do the whole of, you're obviously on your way to doing the whole of it, can you just get them, and we'll publish it as a book? And I said, okay, I didn't think it was, I just thought it was rubbish. Again, that's another thing, I'm Scottish, who's like this? I feel we're all deep. But I did, I thought, no one will want to read this, but fair enough, I'll do it. So when do you want it? They said, the end of the month. I said, you want me to write a whole book in a month? Christmas and New Year, are you kidding? And they said, no, please. So I did. I just prayed and I sat down and I wrote. They sent it off to an editor, they went out, and then a month or so later they said, you're not going to believe this, but your book's just become our best-selling book and there's people all over asking about it. So that for me was, but I tell you the most fantastic thing about it, it's not like the Christian leaders who take note of you and all that kind of stuff, that's fine. But the thing that's always pleased me the most, I wrote this book for my non-Christian friends who might be influenced by Dawkins, and I just thought this is an opportunity to tell them the gospel. I honestly didn't think his book needed refuted, because for me it was just so dumb, but I thought this is an open door to present the gospel. So you can stand in Edinburgh. I remember one in a Borders in Edinburgh, one Christian guy stood up and he said, isn't it terrible that Dawkins wrote this book? I said, you're kidding, look over there. What's the #1 book in the story? He says, the Dawkins book. I said, exactly, isn't that great? He said, why? I said, because here's a book, it's #1 in the story, it's about God, Jesus, and the Bible. You're going to have loads of people who've read this. If you can't talk to them about Jesus, there's something wrong with you. He said, I didn't think about it like that. I said, no, but I did. That's the way. For me, it was a great opportunity. And I remember this lady, she phoned me up and she said, can I talk to you a minute? I said, yeah. She said, I'm a Christian. She said, I love your book. She said, my husband's not a Christian. And she said, I've given up reading books. I used to leave books lying around the house, so that he would read them. And he's never read any of them. So she said, I bought your book for myself, and I left it on our coffee table. And she said, he's a lazy so-and-so. He sits in the afternoon and just watches daytime TV. And she said, I came home the other day, so I couldn't believe it. He was halfway through your book. She said, he loves it. She said, thank you very much. For me, that was it. That's why I wrote for people like that. So that honestly is the story. I never expected it to be a book. I never intended to write a book. I just wrote it for people who don't know Jesus, and I just thought this is an open door. I certainly didn't write it. I never expected Dawkins to read it. I've written letters to President Obama and the Queen, so I'm waiting for them to reply to me now as well.
Thank you, David. I wonder if you could just personalise a little bit how this has been for you, particularly, you referred to it there, being the subject of attack, if we can use that word. Sometimes very vitriolic, bitter, horrible stuff. What does that do to you as a person to know that there are websites out there where people are calling you everything under the sun? I mean, it might not be too strong to put it this way, that in certain quarters you become a hate figure, where people can almost channel towards that. How do you deal with that? I know that, I mean, I'm such a sensitive soul that even if I find that there's one person that doesn't particularly like me, I take that to heart. How do you cope with this stream of bitterness and, yes, hatred towards you? How do you deal with that personally?
Well, if I was as sensitive as that, it'd be deep. For me, I was really, really surprised when it started. Really surprised. And I was surprised it continued. And everyone thinks I love it. They think, oh, you love this stuff. You love stirring up a fight. I don't really. I mean, it's not that I go to bed at night crying myself to sleep, but I remember in the middle of the Dawkins letters, when I was writing it, in fact, towards the end of it actually, towards the end of December, I woke up one night and I just had this overwhelming sense of spiritual oppression and depression. I was just overwhelmed. I went downstairs and I just opened my Bible, and thankfully it was the Psalms. You'd expect a free Kirker to say that, but it was. And it was just like manna to my soul. And there are lots of things that surprise me about it. First of all, I used to think that most people in Britain were apathetic. I've changed my mind. I think the problem is for me that the church is largely apathetic. Most people, when they hear the gospel, either go, that's what I've been looking for, or they get really antagonistic. They hate it. And I've experienced that hatred, and I would regard it as a spiritual hatred. And not a hatred of me personally, because most of them don't know me. I just think it's a hatred of God. And there's a very, very strong spiritual side to that. When I started getting hate mail, it was quite funny, because my mate David Meredith said, well, that's just featured ministers. They're just finally saying what they want to say, And hate mail, it varies considerably. It has gone from the kind of patronising, you're not very intelligent, watch out for this guy, all the way through to death threats, which is, I've had a couple of those, and they were intended as jokes. My wife, one did involve the police, because it was on a website, and my wife was really upset about it, and it was very personal, and it had to be removed. So that did involve the police. So that level of stuff. My problem is in terms of responding. What do you do? Sometimes you respond to people, sometimes you don't. I tend to respond quite a lot. For example, and people say, well, why do you do that? Well, in the latest issue of the Dawkins Letters, I give a testimony of a guy which explains why I did that. I used to sit up for 2 or 3 hours at night responding to all the posts on the Dawkins website. He even employed somebody, because he didn't want to say anything himself, he employed someone to do a review of my book, and she really failed miserably, because she was meant to do a review of 4 books, and she said, surprisingly, of all the flea books, as they called them, Robertson's was the best. So, of course, my publisher jumped on that immediately and started putting on the cover, Dawkins' website, the best of the anti-Dawkins. I mean, they hated me more for that. So, like, poor Dawkins himself couldn't resist it. He got to one point and said, you're not very Christian, are you? And I said, well, what's not the point? You're trying to make us all not very Christian. Or, anyway, I kind of, some ways I bring these things on myself because I wind them up a wee bit. But I kept going with all that, and there was one man in particular. He was so against me, he was a musician, he wrote a piece of music about me, which he called The Wee Flea. I've actually got it on my iPhone, it's hilarious. It's like a piece of classical, have any of you ever had a piece of classical music written about you? I have. I feel I'm right up there, what is it? Mendelssohn, Beethoven, or Finkel's Cave, or something like that, anyway, Robertson's Lament. But he wrote this piece of music, and him writing that piece of music was part of his conversion. Because what happened was, he did this kind of, he envisaged me as, for some reason, as this big, solemn, heavy Scottish Presbyterian minister. So the music begins, something like that, very heavy. And then in the middle of it, he has this wee jingly bit, whatever. And some of his fellow atheists wrote to him and said, what are you doing? You've made him sound humorous. He's evil. Again. And they wrote to him personally to criticize him for the book. And he began to think, what are you doing with these people? They're nuts. So, and then it kind of got worse because there was a prophet, some cult prophet in Russia who tried to kill himself, didn't succeed. And this went on the Dawkins website as object of ridicule of religion and so on. And people were writing in saying, I wish he succeeded. And this guy, Richard Morgan, wrote in and said, look guys, this is a bit tasteless. Even David Robertson, and that shows you where I was in the scale, you know, I was the anti-Dawkins or the whatever. And even David Robertson wouldn't wish anyone dead. And the doctor wrote in LOL afterwards, laugh out loud, and he just thought, I had enough of this. So he withdrew from the Dawkins website. He wrote on the Free Church website, I am a sad and lonely atheist. Is there anything you could say to me? And I got phoned up about this and said, David, this is for you. And I thought it was a wind-up. I thought it was, I get a lot of these kind of traps all the time, people asking me things, trying to get me to say something that they would consider that I think could report me to the police for, usually on homosexuality or something, that's what they're trying. And I thought, nah, this is a wind-up. But I thought, in case it's not, I have to be really careful here. So I wrote back, do you want to do this in public or private? I'm at a conference in Spain at the moment, but I said, I'm willing to dialogue with you if you want to. If in private, here's my email. If in public, go ahead. So he wrote back immediately and said, no, I'm starting in public, I'm doing it in public. And he said, no, I am. He said, what would you say to me? And I said, okay, I can't say anything to you just now because I'm at this conference, but I've got 2 questions for you. First of all, why don't you believe in God? And secondly, what would cause you to believe in God? And I got home on Tuesday and I got this incredible email from him saying, have you heard it? I said, what happened? He said, well, I thought, what a stupid question. Why don't you believe in God? It's kind of obvious. And then he said, what would cause me? He said, I began to think, why do I think that I can work everything out? He says, there's a kind of bee that has this detector in its feet that I don't have as a human being. So he said, what if there's more than 5 dimensions? How can I possibly think that I know everything? And he began all these, so he said, I took out all he said, I printed off every single one of your responses on the whole of the Dawkins things. I kept them all, and I printed them all off. And I looked at them and I thought, they always called me a liar for Jesus. And he said, I could see that you were deluded, I couldn't see that you were a liar. And I couldn't see that you were offensive. So he said, I printed them off. He lives in the south of France, and he said, I got my coffee and my Gauloise, I sat and I read them all, and as I was reading them, these words struck me, we love him because he first loved us. And he said, everything changed for me. My whole universe changed. I went from black and white to living in a technicolor world. It's a great description of conversion. And he said, do you know, there was a stubborn Scottish Presbyterian out in the desert, standing on a rock, telling people the word of God, and nobody was listening. But he said, that's what God used to do. So that is how I cope with it in that sense, because I always think, I'll give you one other example, just a small one. Again, I'll not mention names because this is an ongoing situation, but I debated with somebody, and last Monday, they were on Facebook, fairly part of a group of people who, if I ever go on their Facebook, immediately there's a whole bunch of insults that appear, a group called Secular Scotland. Well, this guy came on and I said to him, I'm going to be in Edinburgh speaking on sex in the city. Would you like to come along? Well, I actually quite like this guy. And lo and behold, he was sitting there right pretty well in the front row. And I threw in a couple of things that I thought would provoke him, which is the wicked side of me. And he didn't rise to the bait. And I spoke to him, I said, are you okay? And he says, yeah, a lot of things have changed. So I've withdrawn from Secular Scotland. He said, I'm meeting with some of you guys actually for coffee. Some of the Christians who were so us in Edinburgh. He says, there's stuff going on here. And I just thought, I've written another book that's just actually going to the printers next week. And I've actually sent him a copy. It's on Who is Jesus? To ask him to review it for me. And he's reading it right now and reviewing it. And I just pray that he'll be converted. So, in all that opposition, for me, I have to be really careful that I realize it's not about me. You can get very, very defensive, and I do. And I also can't blank my face to it. I can't say I'm not going to get hurt by it, because if I do that, I stop being human. Because it does hurt. You get all this stuff that just, and sometimes it just overwhelms you. Sorry, this is an incredibly long answer, but I'll finish with this one. As I said, at the end of the Dawkins letters, I felt this sense, very strong sense of spiritual oppression. I'm not a charismatic. My church is filled with charismatics, but I'm not one, And I don't get visions and dreams and, talk about spiritual warfare and stuff. But I really, really, really did feel it. When I went to hospital, we'd done something on the same-sex marriage thing, Gordon Wilson and myself, and all hell broke loose. And I really mean that. And I ended up in hospital that week. And Peter Saunders of the Christian Medical Fellowship said to me, David, that's not a coincidence. And he was talking about a similar experience he had. I promised Christian Focus I'd write a response to Christopher Hitchens' God is Not Great, which was my second idea. And I was doing it, just so much stuff going on, so much evangelism, pastoral care, things like that. I was keep putting it off. And when I came out of hospital, I started doing it again. And about a month ago, I said to my wife, I am going to finish this by the end of April or rip up my contract. And I sat down, and for the past month, I've been writing not a book about Christopher Hitchens' God is Not Great. It's a book, the subtitle is Why Jesus is Great. Because here's the thing, I meet lots of non-Christians. I can think of very few books on Jesus that I can actually give to them. Most of the books on Jesus are written for Christians. Or they're incredibly simplistic, or they're incredibly academic. But nobody, like, what I would call my generation, which is sort of postmodern, not very sure who Jesus is, and wanting to think about it, I just thought, I'm just going to write a book myself. So I wrote in the same style, Dear Jay, we called it Magnificent Obsession, and I just finished, I have no idea if it's any good. I read it and go, it's brilliant, and I think, no, that's me, because I know what I was trying to say. So I've given it out to other people to have a look at. Pray about that, please, because it'll probably be maybe 3 or 4 months. But last Saturday, we were inducting a guy into a free church plant in St Andrews. This is amazing. An Anglican vicar who we managed to persuade the free church to ordain as a free church minister, whilst he's still an Anglican vicar, which is, don't ask me how. There are many strange things. And I was just about to do that, and I was sitting down on my computer before I went off to St Andrews, finishing off this other book actually, and there was a tweet came up. Now, I tweeted a tweet from Richard Dawkins, which had said, a 6-week-old fetus is less human than a pig. And people got really angry at me and started saying, no, he didn't say that. And I said, look, it's just a retweet from him. He did say that. And somebody then said, well, it is, it's just an egg anyway. And I mean, this is how I get myself in trouble. I said, sure. Next time you go to a restaurant, ask for scrambled fetus on toast and see how you get on. and Ricky Gervais tweeted me and said, personally tweeted me, but also he's got 5 million followers, so they all got it. And he asked him, what do you believe into it? And he started attacking me, insulting me. He hates God, he's full of hatred, that man is unbelievable. And he's just venomous. And so he and I had a correspondence for 5 or 6 tweets, which he has since pulled them all off, which is interesting. But when he's got 5 million followers, loads of them started tweeting me as well, so I've got loads of stuff about, I won't repeat everything they say, but what an evil so-and-so you are, what an idiot, what a fool, etc., from all over the world. And it's just bang, 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 my phone is bing, 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 as I'm heading off to this induction. And that same thing happened, that sense of oppression and depression and so on. And at that point, I was sitting in the church, this is wonderful, we're doing this, but why am I so wound up about this? It's not about you, remember, you've been through this before. And then you click, you've been through this before. Actually, this second book must be alright as well, because otherwise why would the devil bother? I mean, what an amazing coincidence. The day I'm finishing the final chapter, I suddenly get more hate tweets than I've ever had in my life. In 2 hours. So, anyways, that was a very long answer.
Plenty, right? David, are you aware that there's a quieter way to make a living?
Church is not the minister.
I'm going to try that.
I guess what I mean is, you could just do church, and I'm sure you could do a good church, and that people would come to it, and there would be worship on Sundays, and people would be cared for. You could maybe minister to needy in Dundee, and you could do those things. But why is it important, or is it especially important now in 21st century Britain, that you are, and you're encouraging this apologetics, this old-fashioned word when we speak about somebody being an apologist? I never liked it because it always gave the sense that I was apologising for Jesus, and of course it doesn't mean that, but why is it important that you're at Cambridge University, the debating societies, you're out there, as I say, there's a quieter life to be had?
Well, that's two separate questions. The quieter life to be had is in terms of church. I probably couldn't do that anyway. I went to St. Peter's and there were 7 people, and 4 of them left. It's what D. James Kennedy calls a Scotch revival. I just, my job, as far as I'm concerned, is to teach the Bible, but my real passion included in that is to take the gospel to people. Now, what I believe is this. I believe that people in Britain are more open to the gospel now than they've been for 25 years. I've been a minister for 27 years. And I also believe that people are more open, partly because they're ignorant. So they don't mean less religious and so on. But I also believe that the church is less prepared to communicate the gospel. And the church is still living in the era of Christendom. That when I went to Dundee, for example, the standard presumption was that I would go, I'd be a good preacher, we'd sort out the praise as far as we could in terms of the free church, we'd attract reformed people or certain types of people from the area, 200,000. We built a church of 50 to 100 people, that was fine. I was just never satisfied with that, and one, I'm not that great a preacher, and two, I just didn't want that. And I thought, I want to reach people who are not Christians. And I knew that the day of going out handing out tracts or, things was just never ever going to work. So I just thought, take whatever opportunity you get. And first, I've had lots of opportunities. The first major one was the Da Vinci Code. And we did an event down in the DCA in Dundee. And I was amazed. We had 200 people come to it, 100 of whom never went near any church. We had this great discussion and debate about who Jesus really was. And I thought, do you know this? There are people who are asking these kind of questions. And why would they come to my church? Why would they go to any church? You think there's no... I have no interest in photography. Why would I go to a photography club? Because they offer good food? No, I'll go to a restaurant. Good music? No, I'll go to a concert. So it was the same with the church. And I just thought, I want to communicate the gospel. And I just don't know how to do it. So, everyone in St. Peter's, not everyone, but a lot of people in St. Peter's think that I'm this Machiavellian genius who's orchestrated all these changes and stuff that's in the church and got this great master plan. No, I'm not. I haven't a clue what's going to happen next week, never mind next year. There's no great master plan. And that's the same for me in terms of the evangelism, is a door opens, I walk through it. Sometimes I knock on doors and they don't open. That's fine. I honestly believe that the 90% of people in our growth who never go near a church need to hear the gospel. And I don't think we're going to get them through Christian TV or through, announcing signs saying, "Oh, you're welcome to come to church." Or, how are you going to come? How are they going to hear? By seeing the gospel lived out in the lives of believers, but also they will ask questions. And you see, you use the word apologetics. Gordon Wilson, our chairman, has banned us from using that word because it does sound like you're apologising for the faith, or in Christian terms, it sounds like you've got to be an Oxford or a Cambridge professor and have a degree in physics to be able to defend the Christian faith. And my answer to that would be no, you don't. We all have an opportunity, to share our faith in different ways, and we all need to think about it. And my background is, I'm a farm labourer's son. My dad left school when he was 12. Yet, I go there into his house now, and he's 80 years old. There's Martin Lloyd-Jones, there's systematic theologies, there's more theology books than most ministers. It's just because he likes to think about his faith. He would say he's not smart, he's not clever, he hates speaking, he hates praying in public, anything like that. And I just think, I want everyone. The toughest question I've ever had, I've been interviewed by journalists from the Times, Telegraph, BBC and so on. Toughest questions I've ever had have been from 12-year-old kids in the housing schemes in Dundee. And I'm telling you this, if you can't answer those questions, you're really stuffed. But if you can answer those questions, you can take the gospel to anybody. And one of the things I'm a little bit perturbed about in the church, by the way, is that what I find in churches, especially middle-class Christians, think, well, in order to reach ordinary people, we have to dumb down. When I went to St. Peter's, I went exactly the opposite way. I said, no, we're going to lift the barrier here. Because at the time of the Reformation, what did they do? Did they say, well, people can't read, so we'll just do medieval mystery plays? No, they said, we're going to get schools and teach them to read. And so people come into the church and they'll say, oh, nobody's smart, you're all academics in here. But no, we're not all academics, and you have a brain, you can think. And I remember a guy who had learning difficulties, as they put it. I remember in Aberdeen, him saying this to me, and I said this to him in public, I said, Jesus knows what you're like, and he knows what you can think, and he knows how you think. You think the way that you think, and ask Jesus to help you. And he basically said to me, I have a brain. I said, absolutely, you have a brain. He said, you have real questions, and you can think. And he just burst into tears. Because everyone presupposes that he's an idiot. Even people who are being nice about it. And my view is, everyone can think, and everyone's got questions. And no one's got all the answers. But we do know someone who is the truth.
Nonetheless, David, the average, ordinary Christian, if I can use that, as opposed to guys like yourself, they're looking and listening and thinking, well, he knows all about it, he's read, he's got answers, and if someone comes up to you and says, how can there be a God, and all this suffering in the world, and you're trained and practiced, you can just answer that, but how do I answer that in my workplace, with my neighbour? Most Christians, as I experience it, find themselves, I wouldn't know what to say. But what's your one encouragement that you could give to people to say, well, to encourage them to take a bit more courage?
Well, let me discourage you first of all, in one sense. What I do is relatively unique. Maybe 1 in 1,000 Christians can do it. But it's just tiny. What I do is tiny. You can put me up. I prefer almost to be put up in front of the gay society at university, or a hostile pub, or the atheists, and have people fire questions at me and have a go at me. Because I think on my feet, and I think really quickly, and I read really broadly, and I've got a lot of stuff like that. And the last thing I would want is Christians to think, oh, we have to be like that guy. First of all, the world would be so incredibly boring, and secondly, we'd all kill each other. We don't want to do that. And also, this is just the way that God has led me, and the way that God has made me. I was in Edinburgh University, and I was involved in student politics rather than the Christian Union. I spent ages debating and so on. I almost got elected senior president of that university until the student newspaper ran a campaign against me for being a Christian. And that was because of my perceived views of homosexuality. And then, even then, almost 30 years ago, I knew the way that our society was going. And I remember just being guided by that experience, because I worked so hard. But after I wrote this book, The Dawkins Letters, I'm standing at the Borders with now sadly defunct Borders in Dundee, turned almost blasting me into a Marks and Spencer's compared to the bookstore, which is awful. I weep every time I go in. It's very rare. And I stand with this huge mic, and with a crowd of people, and people were starting firing questions, and I just had deja vu. I just thought, 25 years ago, I was doing this in politics, having people yell at me, answering questions. I'm doing, except this time, speaking for Jesus. And then the thought went through my head, Lord, why couldn't I do this 20 years ago? And the answer is this: now I've got 25 years experience in ministry. So I've got 30 years experience of reading books and answering questions for non-Christians, and 30 years experience in ministry of burying, kids, older people, and dealing with, people, homosexual prostitutes, absolutely all different kinds of stuff. And so, where it's coming from, I think God has been training me all that time. Do I expect everyone else to then be able to do the same? No, don't be daft, of course not. But what I expect every Christian to be able to do is to be renewed in your minds. You can all think, and you can all articulate your faith. Now, I think in the church we made a big mistake. We don't train our people properly in terms of, apologetic, sorry that word, preaching. We call it persuasive evangelism, giving people reasons to believe. And we don't encourage people to ask questions. Like the suffering question, or this faith science question. And what we do is we say, go read that book. But books are generally, they're okay, but you've got to think it through yourself and apply it in your own way. So I listen, I'm so proud of, I went to the Morgan Academy in my older daughter. I went to the art class, and I said, how's she getting on? And the teacher said, that girl is unbelievable. Well, her and the Muslims said, they take on the whole class. Every time we have a discussion, she says, they just preach to them. And I'm going, oh my goodness, what does she do? I said, no, he said, obviously she's used to thinking. And that's what I would just encourage everyone to do, is just think. That there's no question, oh God, why does this happen? Why does that happen? But also be humble. Say, I don't know. I But there's so much almost to stimulate, so much almost to learn. A really good friend, John Ellis, who's a consultant surgeon at 9 Wells, and he and I, when we get together, we're frightening. Because we just but put me into Kirkton, and there's a woman came up and she started saying, why does this happen to me? I've had a brain tumour, my husband died of a brain tumour, I've got 4 kids, I'm going, and to be able to talk to her about Jesus, but having read and thought through a lot of these different issues, it's just so important. It's not enough to say, oh, Jesus is the answer. Because you guys say, well, what's the question? And, and I honestly think you can all do that. I'll give you one example. One man up in Broder, quiet as could be, never said boo about goose, be in his 60s, not long being a Christian. One of the most effective witnesses I've ever seen. We were at a graveside, and of course, most of the men in the village would go to the graveside, very few of the women. But the family were there on the graveside, and they were crying their eyes out. And this man was just standing there, and he went up to them, and I asked him, what do I say to them? They were really, and he's not, very mild, very gentle. He said, excuse me, he said, look out. And it was just so incredibly powerful. And I thought, good for you. But I'll tell you what we do. We like everything to be in a program. I'll give you a story. I'll say one example. I'll give you another one. A woman came to me and she said, David, I'm a Christian. I know it's wonderful, isn't it? She said, yeah, but my husband's not a Christian. What should I do? So I gave her the whole spiel about don't nag him, don't, preach at him, let him be won over by the duty of your life and all that kind of stuff. And she came back to me later and she said, I'm really, really sorry. I said, I'm sorry for it. She said, I broke your rules. I said, oh, what happened? I was ready for a disaster. She said, well, I was lying in bed at night and I couldn't sleep. So I started reading my Bible. It was that F-E. I said, Ephesians, that one. And so I was reading that Ephesians. She said, and it was so good that I woke my husband up and said, hey, listen to this. I said, you started reading the Bible to your husband at 3 o'clock in the morning. She said, yeah. She said, I'm so sorry I broke your rule. I said, I'll stop my rules. I said, do you know this? To the end of his days, your husband is never ever going to forget that you were so excited that you walked. Now, you know what we would do? We would write a book about it. How to evangelize your husband by waking him up at 3 in the morning. We turn it into a technique. And we don't need to do that. We just need to be real. And we ourselves need to be thinking through these things.
Thank you, David. Folks, there's some other directions I can go with this, but I want to just create some space now in case there's something that you want to fire back at David, if he's used to that, or ask of him, or explore something that we haven't talked about at all. I'll create some space for that if you want to step in. So, any questions or comment or change about anything that's talked about or not? Mike?
Start all with me. You're really good at engaging in debate online. You do a lot of that sort of stuff in different ways. I've followed some of your debates on Facebook, and I'm not entirely convinced that that's a strong point. What do you think?
You can what?
I'm not entirely convinced that that's a strong point in your artillery, as it were.
Well, here's the thing. Most Christians get really upset at my interaction on Facebook because my interaction on Facebook attracts a certain type of person who becomes incredibly vociferous. And I sometimes respond, some of these Christians think in kind. I don't. I think people idiots when they are. No. The trouble is, this is what Richard Dawkins does. He knows that Christians are supposed to be nice. So he sets them up all the time by being incredibly rude, and Christians don't bounce back. And honestly, forgive me saying this expression, sometimes I want to look at people and say, where's your balls? You wouldn't do this. If someone was hammering your wife, you wouldn't let them away with this. So I think without being aggressive, though it can come across, and the danger with Facebook, by the way, is online you cannot tell tone, ever. You cannot tell tone. So people read into online what's there, and they'll read into things that are being rude, and then they'll say you're being really rude, and then other people read, oh, it was being really rude. But you might not be. I'm of an old Scottish stock in this, and my wife's the same. We are both used to publicly disagree with different people, and have no problem with that. But there's this kind of nice Christianity, and this nice, I say basically Anglophile or Americanized type where people say, oh no, it's really impolite to disagree with people. I was just in a seminar where I didn't agree with some of the things that were said. And I said so about one of the things, some kind of, well, thank you so much, because people don't normally disagree. Well, what's wrong with us? For me, that's a sign of absolute immaturity, that we're not able to disagree without personalising things. So, the Facebook stuff, many times I've got it wrong. There's no question about that. But I also know there are more people who become Christians through my Facebook interaction than anything else. So I'll take the risk. But it's very exposed. I would say if you're going to get involved in online debates, back off quite a lot. Just stop them. Because people get very obsessive. They get, you reach a point. In general, my advice would be don't. Unless you can take a lot of dirt, and unless you know when to stop, and unless you can pick out the gems. It's very interesting. There are 3 sites that I've been involved in recently. One Kirk, Secular Scotland, and the Dawkins website, there's another one as well. And on the actual public thing of those sites, basically there are lots of people that attack me. Privately, I get messages from lots of people who agree, including some of the people who are attacking me in public. Now, why they do that, I do not know. But somebody will write something in public attacking me and then write me personally and say, actually, I'm covering my back, but really I agree with what you said, and I want to find out more. So, you may be right. And what I do now is, rather than go on forever, I get up in the morning, I look and see if there's anything worth responding to. I'll maybe do it for about 30 minutes and then stop. Because otherwise, it's a good question.
Facebook, thanks, Mike. Yes, Andrew.
You mentioned that you don't think that the British population is apathetic. You think there's a large section which is very hostile and hate what we stand for. What are the roots of that hate?
Well, that's a really interesting one. I think biblically, we're told that people hate God anyway. People have this idea, we love God and so on. But I think the more specific aspects is what's happened in the culture. Is first of all, the Guardian poll in November 2008, I think it was, which said that more than 60% of people in Britain believe that religion is the major cause of evil. And you'll notice subtle things, like the Boston bombers are never Islamic terrorists, they're religious terrorists. You're religious. You're in the same category. It's just a different variation of it. So part of it is fear of religion. And that's deeply instilled in terms of the popular culture. You just think of the people who are religious in soap operas. They're either lunatics, scary-eyed lunatics, or they're old fuddy-duddies, hypocrites. That's the image and so on that's portrayed. I think where the hatred comes out is in the 1960s. Some of you will remember book Honest to God and so on. God is dead and so on. Everyone expected religion just to die. Richard Dawkins wrote The God Delusion, not because of 9/11, but because in his Oxford classes he was finding more and more Muslims and Christians. And he just couldn't believe that this was continuing. And so what happens is people are very assured in themselves that there is no God. Then they hear someone like me come along and blow that apart. And they get very emotional, very angry. I was down at Cambridge once and I mentioned that I was surprised at how emotional some atheists got. Because why get emotional about something that doesn't exist? I don't start yelling at people who believe in the Loch Ness Monster. But it was so funny. It was one of those God moments, because this man stood up, it turned out he was a lecturer in Cambridge University, and he stood up with his packed bookstore and he shouted out at me, "What do you mean we get emotional? We don't get emotional, for goodness sake, we do not get emotional! What are you talking? I've never heard someone, have you heard this rubbish?" And he carried on with that religious. And I was going, thank you, Lord, thank you, Lord, thank you, Lord. Brilliant. And so one of his friends says, "Shut up, you fool, and sit down, you've just proved his point." And he sat down, and he came to the end, to be fair to him, he apologised to me, and he said, "Look, I'm really sorry, I don't know about it." He's like, "Can I hand that to you on a play?" I said, "Yeah, thanks." I really appreciate it. I said, "But you see my point. Why are you so emotional?" You see all different kinds of levels. When I was converted, I was 16 years old, and we had Bible studies in my house. And lots of my friends were coming, and people were being converted. We had 30, 40 young people. I thought this was what church was like. I just thought we taught people the Bible and they were converted. Because that's what happened to me when I first became a Christian. So lots of people were becoming Christians. And I remember there was a knock on the door. Man came to the door. "Is my son in?" "Yeah." I said, "Oh, he's not very pleased." So anyway, and imagine this as a teenager, how cringeworthy this is, in a room of 30 of your mates. "You," he says, "home, now. I thought you were at an online party. Turns out you're one of these Bible things." Now with us, even in the 1970s, an online party was drink and drugs and sex. His dad was happy for him to go to that, but not to come to a Bible study. Why? We got a lot of students in St. Pete's. One Sunday, 3 weeks into new term, the start of the year, this girl is there, started coming to church, and her parents are with her, and I met them at the door and said, "It's nice to see you. If you come down from Aberdeen to see him," they said, "Oh yes." And I said, "Well, forgive me asking this, but it's only 3 weeks into term. Is there something wrong? It's been unusual for parents to visit so quickly." And they said, "Yes." And I said, "Oh dear, I'm sorry to hear that. Is there anything I can help you with?" And they said, No, you're the problem." And I thought, "Oh my goodness, what have I done? What have I said? What's going on here?" So I kind of swallowed, and I said, "Okay, why am I the problem?" And they said, "Well, we brought her daughter to be normal. We thought she'd come to university, drink a bit, have a boyfriend, and get on with her studies. Instead, we get letters home, 'Mum, Dad, love Dundee, great place. Starting going to church, it's fantastic.'" I said, "So you came down, because your daughter always said she was going to church, and you came down to check her out, or to check us out?" And they said, "Yes." I said, "How do you find it?" "You were surprisingly normal." To which, and this is why I get in trouble. Sometimes I make my own faith. To which I then said, "Well, you got us on a good week. It's next week we do the child sacrifice." And for a nanosecond, they just looked. As though I said, "Come on guys, what were you expecting?" But I think there's that. There's ignorance, there's fear, there's prejudice, there's been religious abuse. We had a woman come into the church, and I was amazed she came because she was brought up really strict Catholic, and the whole priest abuse thing had really put her off. There's, loopy Christians, there's all that kind of stuff, so all that gets gelled together. But there is nothing that affects people more than when they begin to suspect that God is real. I remember an old elder standing at the door once, and a boy came in who I'd been visiting. He was in his 30s, he was a rigger. And he came in, he was sweating. He said, You come only my house just to get information about me so you can preach about it." I said, come on, you can't really think that. I didn't even know you were going to be here." And he looks at me and he says, "That's freaky." And he started running, and this old elder, who's an old quiet guy, shouted, "Aye, you can run, but you can't hide." And I just thought, yeah, when God's after you, Saul went to kill Christians before God got to him, So I think that's part of it. It's much fun.
Thank you, David. Our time's through. We could go on, couldn't we? There's plenty to talk about here, and we could go on, but there is a third seminar round, as you all know, and I want to give you just a little gap in between, in case you need to go to Oldham Abbey or have a coffee in between times. Then after that, folks, at 4 o'clock, I hope you're all going to assemble back here at St Andrews in the sanctuary for a part of the day that I'm so looking forward to. Fishy Music are going to lead that closing worship time. So if you didn't get your seminar earlier, then come along for the closing worship. That's all to come. In the interim period before 3 o'clock in your next one, if you still want to grab something by way of David's interaction, then just do that, because I don't think you're rushing away right this very moment. But in the meantime, folks, I want to ask if you'll join me and thank you, and to say thank you, David, for his openness.
One is a very simple one, just to pray, because I know this is a horrible image, I kind of expose myself in that, like Mike's question about Facebook and things like that. I get lots of things wrong. And I know that one word I say wrong can put someone off Christ for life, because that's what the devil uses. So please pray for wisdom with that, because the alternative to that is to become so banal. I've never been in a meeting that anyone's ever complained is boring. So that's good. But I want people to be able to see Jesus. So as you pray especially about the thing, magnificent obsession. And pray for solace and all the stuff that we're trying to do as well. Because we're not actually trying to do anything other than, we're just trying to encourage Christians to reach out with the gospel. This is all the devil's got. You look around at the worst, it's all the devil's got. You've got something much, much better. And my experience is that deep down everyone knows there's got to be something more. And you've got it. And you don't need some mega evangelist to come. The days of the mega evangelist in this country, in my view, are gone. It's the local church reaching out, Christians reaching out and supporting and helping one another, and just being confident. Actually, the gospel really works. That's why new Christians are such good evangelists, because they believe it, because it just happened to them. Older Christians tend to think, it happened then, it can't happen now, or whatever. Just have more confidence in the gospel, and just keep learning. But thank you very much, and I do appreciate your prayers.